Montreal, Portugal. Fantastic. Right, well, I think we're going to get going. So it's incredible to see so many people joining us from so many different places. I believe we've got 250 participants joining us tonight from over 30 countries, which is pretty impressive. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Advire's new course, The Call of the Wild Feminine. It is really wonderful to have you all here tonight. It's sort of like a giant women's circle reaching around the globe. So that's just wonderful. Before we move on to our speakers tonight, I want to tell you a bit about how the course will operate and introduce you to the people behind the scenes as you'll be communicating with them, and you'll be seeing a few of us too over the next 12 weeks. And I always find it really helpful to know who's actually filling my computer screen each week. So I'm Francesca Price, and I normally bring together events around food, farming, and the environment. So talking about the spiritual is actually a new area of work for me. And although I would say I've been a seeker for most of my life, having dabbled in everything from evangelical Christianity as a teenager to Buddhism and paganism later in life. And now I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by women who are interested in the same thing, which is fantastic. And so we have a lot of conversations about this sort of thing. I'll be facilitating every second week, and the other weeks will be hosted by my colleague, Amrita Kaur. So I'll just hand over to Amrita to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here, and I just feel so honored to be a part of such an amazing course curated by Advire. So really lovely to meet you. And yeah, so I'm coming to you from West Sussex in the south of England. And really my work is about offering a space where we can explore how we can reunite these threads between people, the living world, and the sacred as well. And I suppose really at its heart, this is about acknowledging that, you know, not only are we living in a time of profound outer kind of crisis and breakdown at a civilizational level, but also that really there's the need to acknowledge this kind of inner spiritual dimension to this crisis. And in many ways, I feel like that kind of inner crisis is to do with our relationship to the living world. And it's about how we can remember what it means for us to come back into a way of being that's rooted in reverence, in reciprocity, and in awareness of the sacred, of all of the sacred nature of all of life. So, of course, the feminine is such an important thread within this work. So I'm so honored to be able to be part of this journey with you. I'm really looking forward to getting to know some of you along the way.
Thanks very much, Amrita. So I'll just say that none of this would be possible without the incredible team at Advire, who is led by Ruby and Christopher Reed. And they've been bringing together both online and in-person events now for many years, exploring how we act and relate in the world and how we can better align our lives with natural living systems. Now, some of you may have attended their other courses and know how transformative they are. Ruby and Christabel will this time be behind the scenes, so I'm just going to hand over to them to take you through the practical details of the course over the next 3 months.
Hi everyone, welcome. It's really, really exciting to be with you all tonight and to see so many different faces from around the world. I'm not sure how everyone's viewing it right now, but I encourage you to go into gallery view, and it's so many cameras are on, which just makes me so excited for the journey ahead for the next 3 months, that we're going to be learning from such inspirational different speakers from around the world about their practices, about different ways of understanding the feminine, and the wild feminine in particular, and the role that this has to play in the coming decades. It's a time of so much division, of so much crisis, of so much change, and how we can all come together with this strong sense of direction and purpose and belonging, and really support one another in this journey. So I suppose Advire we never really thought of ourselves as kind of embodying this idea of the feminine, but as two sisters, blood sisters working together, I suppose we really are exploring it in different ways as well. And it's very exciting to have been able to put this together, and to think about the feminine from these different perspectives and angles. Even when you might not have associated it before, we can realize that no, actually we are embodying it. And I'm sure that many people will feel the same. So Advire is a global platform for transformative education, and we're interested in transformation and what that looks like and how people can change how they experience the world, think, relate, act. And we're creating experiences that shift perspectives, and particularly in connection and purpose and systemic change. So the sessions are weekly. We'll be meeting every Tuesday between 7 and 9 p.m. UK time. Note that on the 31st of October, the clocks change. So depending on where you are in the world, your time might change an hour as well. So just check that. Then at the end of each month, there is a discussion session hosted by Amrita. So the weekly sessions will be more about absorbing and learning and asking questions. And then those monthly sessions will be able to be creating community and sharing more. There's also the discussion platform. I'll share the link for that in the chat box as well, because I believe that the link wasn't working for everybody, but that's a place for us to write questions and share resources and thoughts and reflections. And there's different categories that you can post in on the left channel. And we're going to release the recordings the following day. So don't worry if you miss a session, you'll be able to catch up. We'll send them out in email as well. But we won't send them out in email until the Monday before. So we'll send one email a week that will be included recording, and it will also be the reminder for the session the next day. If you want to watch the recording before the Monday after the session, you need to watch it on the website in the course area. And the login details for the course area where you can access all the recordings were in the welcome email I sent. I've sent it twice now, but if you didn't receive it, send me an email or a chat and I will send that to you. If anything comes up at any time during the course, you can send me an email, Christabel an email, or any of the other hosts, and we'll get back to you and try and resolve it, whether it's something that you're concerned about or just anything else. Just feel free to get in touch. We're really happy to meet people and to help resolve any issues that arise. If you can't attend a session, but you have questions, you can also share them in advance and we will ask them to the speaker in the session. For questions during the session, please write them in the chat box just as they come to you, and we'll be collating them, and then the facilitator of the session will be sharing those questions at the relevant time. So do write them in the chat box and they won't get missed. I'm aware that I'm babbling on a little bit, but I think that's probably enough. Just a reminder to do check the course pack. It's got really good reading lists in, and do share as well any readings that you think we've missed off, because it was an extensive list, and we would love to hear from you all as well. So Fran, thank you so much, and thank you everyone.
Oh, thank you, Ruby. No, you weren't babbling on at all. It's fantastic. There's a lot of work being put into it, and it's really important that we get all that across. But as Ruby has said, please let us know if you have any questions, because we just want to make sure this is a really fantastic experience for everybody. And we've got some incredible speakers coming up over the next 12 weeks. And I just encourage everyone to ask questions, because this is such a golden opportunity to actually put things that you have questions about, and they might come to you during the actual talks to these amazing speakers that you may not get access to another time in your life. So this is your golden opportunity. So with that, I have to say it is my immense honor to introduce Anne Baring, who has been described as one of the most important cultural and spiritual philosophers of our time. Anne was educated at Oxford, where she studied medieval history. And then in her 20s, she traveled throughout Asia, working in such countries as India, Cambodia, Thailand, Taiwan, Indonesia, and Japan. She says these journeys changed the course of her life, because they put her in touch with the sacred literature and the art of ancient and extraordinary cultures. Anne returned to London when she was 26 and published her first book, The One Work, A Journey Towards Self, which looked at the teachings of Hinduism and Buddhism and how they were like Christianity. She then entered Jungian Analysis, and it was during this time that she also started work as a fashion designer, running 2 very successful shops on Beecham Place in London. She says this outlet for her creativity helped her to overcome serious depression. And it was only after 12 years of dressing London's elite that she actually started to study to become a Jungian analyst herself. And she's since authored 7 books, including The Myth of the Goddess, with her friend Jules Cashford, which remains the cornerstone of research into the lost feminine for writers and researchers around the world. She went on to publish The Mystic Vision and the Divine Feminine, and her most recent book, The Dream of the Cosmos, A Quest for the Soul, which was reprinted in 2020 and was awarded the Book of the Year by the Medical and Scientific Network. Many of Anne's incredible lectures over the last 30 years can be found on her website, which is annebering.com. But I'm just going to pass over to her now. Anne, it's a real pleasure to have you with us tonight.
Nearly forgot to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Francesca. That was a lovely introduction, and it's lovely to be here with you all. So I'm going to begin at the beginning and give you a long historical survey as I go through this talk. We are now at the crossroads, faced with a need to make a choice. Do we continue on the unconscious path we've been on for thousands of years? Or do we choose a different path and a different vision of reality to guide us? No one has told us who we are and why we are here on this planet, or where we go when we die. We have to find the answers ourselves, and we are finding them. I will start with a definition of the feminine. In my book, The Dream of the Cosmos, I define the feminine as the soul of the cosmos, the invisible cosmic web of life that connects each one of us to all others, as well as to the life of the planet and the greater life of the cosmos. It stands for the recognition that we live within a sacred order and that we have a responsibility to protect the life of the planet and all the variety of species it embraces, instead of exploiting them for the benefit of our species alone. In sum, the word feminine stands for a totally different worldview and for the feeling or heart values which reflect and support that worldview. A totally different relationship with the planet, which is based on love, care, and service, rather than domination and control. The key word of the feminine is relationship, and the key feeling or quality is love. The word feminine includes cosmic soul and nature as aspects of what we have called spirit, as well as our individual souls and bodies, which are also aspects of spirit. For a long time now, we have lost touch with our immortal soul, have even forgotten that such a thing exists. We do not recognize or realize that our body is the precious vehicle of the soul in this material dimension of reality. This loss has led to many of the problems we face now, including the mental illness that is affecting so many of us, including our children. Depression is a sickness of the neglected soul. We face 3 great threats: climate change, nuclear weapons, and our growing numbers, which could lead to conflicts as food and water become scarce. Climate change stimulates conflicts that could spill over into nuclear conflict. Any use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict would create catastrophic climate consequences, compounding the current impact of climate change emissions. The crisis of climate change, with the latest urgent warning from the UN of Code Red, is the end result of thinking that we can dominate and control nature for our own needs and to our sole advantage. Now, this attitude to nature has grown out of a radical change in cosmology that began over 4,000 years ago, when we began to lose the image of the goddess who connected us to nature, who actually personified nature. This change in cosmology has controlled us ever since and led eventually to the beliefs of materialist science that the earth and all its forms of life are simply matter that is devoid of consciousness. They have no awareness of what is happening to them. That is, the earth has no awareness of what's happening to it. We are not part of the environment that we're living in. We are mind, and nature is matter. This alienation from nature has brought us to the crisis we face now, and I will try and explain what happened, in particular to give you the historical background as to why this situation has come about, and why woman's voice was silenced for some 4 millennia. It is of the utmost importance now that woman is aware of this history and also aware of the values imprinted on her by her immemorial experience as daughter, mother, and grandmother, giving birth to and caring for life for hundreds of generations. The feminine archetype is rising now, leaving behind the long dominance of the masculine one. The political, economic, and religious world is still overwhelmingly controlled by men, but the tectonic plates are shifting. The butterfly is emerging from the chrysalis. The last 100 years, even the last 20 years, has seen phenomenal changes in the lives of women, who are now able to enter many of the professions hitherto filled entirely by men. But this is also causing a backlash, as we can see with the return of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Misogyny is still deeply present and repressive of women in societies worldwide. A woman is murdered in the UK every 3 days, usually by a domestic partner. And we've just had another terrible murder of a young teacher in London. The situation is even worse in the US and in India, where the rape and murder of women from the lowest caste is endemic. Without reconnecting with the soul and the guidance and wisdom of the feminine, without going in search of the values it carries and opening our hearts to its subtle guidance, we will not understand the purpose of our presence on this planet, nor will we be able to dismantle the beliefs and habits of behavior which draw us ever closer to the destruction of our habitat and therefore to the extinction of our species. The resurgence of the feminine invites a new planetary consciousness, where the deepest values of the heart in both men and women, compassion, informed intelligence, and the longing to protect, heal, and make whole, are able to find expression in ways that can best be described as devotion to all planetary life. What does it mean to be a wild woman? It means to be in touch with these values and capable of expressing them. Now, turning to history, I will speak first about what I call the Lunar Era, because the moon was of supreme importance during this time, and relationship was the key factor. The Great Mother and the Great Goddess was the deity worshipped for many thousands of years, from at least 30,000 BC, worshipped in India, in Europe, in China, in Africa, and in South America. We can find the earliest figures from this era, dated to 25,000 BC, in the caves of the Dordogne area of France, as well as elsewhere in Europe. People saw the starry cosmos as a mother from whose womb all forms of life emerged in an endless cycle of birth, death, and regeneration. The cycles of the moon were seen as the basic template for this repeating cycle: the birth of the crescent moon, its growth to fullness, its waning, and then the 3 days of darkness before the birth of a new crescent. Life and death were not polarized opposites, but two phases of a single process. The phases of the moon were imagined as a maiden, a mother, and a crone, or a daughter, a mother, and a grandmother. All life was sacred because it came forth from the womb of the Great Mother. Humans, animals, and plants were sacred because they were children of the Great Mother, emerging from her womb and part of her being. Nature and the cosmos were both regarded as sacred. The shamanic cultures of the Lunar Era were in touch with the ancestors and with the life of animals and plants. They knew there was an inner aspect to life as well as an outer one, and through an expanded consciousness, often assisted by psychedelic plants, they had a sense of kinship with all creation. They saw their lives as part of the great cycle of birth, death, and renewal, and knew through shamanic experience that although the body died, their soul life would take another form in a new life. This was the foundation of belief in reincarnation, the fact that we have many hundreds, even thousands of lives on this planet. In the last century, there was a great Lithuanian archaeologist called Mirycha Gumbutas, who made discoveries about an extraordinary culture that she called Old Europe, that existed in a large area of Europe between 7,000 and 3,500 BC. That's a long time. A culture that worshipped the Great Mother, or the goddess. Her discoveries were recorded in two of her books, The Civilization of the Goddess and The Language of the Goddess. And one of her most interesting findings was that there was no evidence of war and weapons in the goddess cultures of the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras. The later megalith culture of Neolithic Europe that built the great stone astronomical observatories like Stonehenge was part of this wider goddess culture. Woman was revered because, like nature, the Great Mother, she was the carrier of new life. This is terribly important. The transmission has never been broken. The swelling of her womb was associated with the swelling of the crescent moon as it rose to fullness. And woman's gestation period was 10 lunar months of 28 days. These societies were matriarchal, not in the sense that the mother rules, but in the sense that the mother serves the community in her role as leader. There would have been circles of older women who guided the clans, much as the indigenous grandmothers do today. Later, we know about the great goddesses of Egypt, where the goddess Isis was worshipped for 3,000 years, and the goddess Inanna in Sumer for at least 2,000 years. The Black Madonna statues in France, of which there are now about 450, are the last vestiges of the Great Mother of the Lunar Era. They represented the wisdom of nature, the Great Mother. I should add that for thousands of years, women served in the temples of the goddesses in Egypt, in Sumer, in Greece, and in Rome. And this only stopped with the coming of the patriarchal religions, when women's voice was silenced and her role as priestess was forbidden. Now I come to what I call the solar era, which is the phase of separation. And later on, I'm going to show you a diagram which will summarize 3 phases of the evolution of consciousness. So around 3,500 BC, that's 5,500 years ago, we move into what I call the solar era, when there was a profound change of cosmology, whose effects have lasted until the present day. This change began with the slow infiltration into the European area of nomadic warrior tribes who worshipped sky gods. These tribes descended from the vast area of the Russian steppes through the gap between the Black and Caspian Seas into the settled agricultural communities which had worshipped the Great Mother for over 3,000 years. They brought with them the horse and the war chariot, and their patriarchal customs and beliefs spread southwards and westwards into Greece and Crete, and eastwards into the Middle East, Persia, Afghanistan, and India. Their arrival must have struck terror in the peaceful agricultural people living in the river valleys, who had no defense against them. These tribes brought with them a hierarchical social order. Their arrival led to the growth of city-states with powerful king rulers and priesthoods, to the caste system in India, which disgracefully still exists, and everywhere the subjugation of women in a warrior and priestly culture. A new theme is heard: the acquisition of power, territorial conquest, and the enslavement of conquered peoples, accompanied always by the rape of women. War, slaughter, and slavery become the main theme. This scenario has lasted into our own time, when the great powers are vying with each other, brandishing their nuclear weapons and preparing for a future war. Can you imagine any of the current world leaders actually loving this planet? This is the ancient and profound trauma that women need to know about if we are ever to break the habit of rivalry, war, and conquest, and the pursuit of power that is so deeply ingrained in the male psyche, and which could lead to our extinction as a species. I should say that the male psyche also carries a deep trauma from this long indoctrination into the fear of attack and the need constantly to prepare for a future war. We can recognize in the Taliban of Afghanistan the distant descendants of these Bronze and Iron Age conquerors. The change in cosmology and social practices brought by these warrior peoples was the original trauma, which led to all the subsequent traumas inflicted by hero conquerors like Achilles, Alexander the Great, Caesar, Napoleon, and conquerors in other parts of the world like Genghis Khan. So war and empire building became a habit, and empire building began in Assyria and continues to this day with China and Russia and America. Men were forced to become warriors, and women were relegated to be the carriers of male seed. Their voice was silenced. The Taliban treat women in exactly the same way as women were treated by the men of Assyria and Babylonia 4,000 years ago. I have a book which proves this, forcing them to wear a veil and to be accompanied by a male family member whenever they leave the house. It's incredible that this has been repeated for 4,000 years. We can see the fear that women are feeling in Afghanistan as the Taliban take control of their lives. For 20 years, they had lived in freedom from fear for themselves and their children, the fear that their lives would not be valued and their voice silenced. That fear is identical to the fear that women have felt for thousands of years at the approach of an invader. The Lunar Era, with its profound relationship with nature, was replaced by the era that saw us draw away from nature, able to control and direct it to our advantage. Linear time replaced cyclical time as records began to be kept. The left hemisphere of the brain, with its sequential kind of thinking, which is the predominant form now, began to take precedence over the imaginative right hemisphere that is our conduit to the soul. This was promoted by the invention of writing and the control by the priesthoods. The sun replaced the moon as the most important cosmic body, and the harmonious relationship between the rhythms of the earth's life and those of the cosmos were forgotten. Patriarchal religions forbade shamanic practices and communion with the ancestors and engaged in millennia of brutal conquests in the name of Yahweh, God, or Allah. I will give you one example of this process which took place in Palestine and which has had huge repercussions to this day. Prior to 621 BC, in the magnificent first temple in Jerusalem that was built by Solomon, there was both a goddess and a god who were worshipped there and who together created the world. But in 621 BC, a group of priests called Deuteronomists changed the older cosmology by eradicating all trace of the goddess Asherah, who had previously been worshipped with Yahweh, her divine spouse. They cleverly invented the myth of the fall and gave the title that belonged to the goddess Asherah, mother of all living, to Eve, blaming her for bringing sin, suffering, and death into the world. This story is told in Genesis 2 and 3. Until this happened, Asherah was worshipped as divine wisdom and the Holy Spirit, and also as the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, whose fruit bestowed immortality. So this was the beginning of a monotheistic concept of deity, where the divine feminine was excluded or banished, and where God or spirit was defined as a distant male creator, separate from his creation. Even the Holy Spirit was changed from female to male at a Christian council in AD 325. So we've been given a totally distorted image of God, with the feminine dimension of the divine deleted from it for 2,600 years in that area of the world. The role of Eve in the myth of the fall was the major reason for the subjugation and silencing of women for 2,500 years in both Judaism and Christianity. Islam copied the patriarchal model that existed in these two religions, and all three banished the divine feminine as the partner of the divine masculine. Christianity inherited this truncated concept of deity from Judaism because it kept the Old Testament, and it made the myth of the fall the foundation of the need for a redeemer, the celibate, only Son of God. This myth, in my view, has had a catastrophic effect on Western civilization and has been responsible for the oppression of women during the Christian era. It gave rise to a deep sense of sinfulness and guilt, and the belief that we, as a species, had been exiled to earth as a punishment for the sin of Eve, taking that apple from the tree of knowledge. All this was not, in my view, divine revelation, but a story made up to keep illiterate people, and women in particular, subject to their priests and their rulers. The most important effect of monotheism and the loss of the feminine aspect of deity was that nature was split off from spirit, no longer was part of spirit. Spirit was no longer immanent within nature, immanent within the world. The loss of the goddess meant that nature was no longer sacred and alive with spirit. The earth was now created by a distant God who was not present within every aspect of his creation, as was the case with the Great Mother. So we are faced with the effects of this dualist split today as we realize the harm we have done to nature. We are part of nature, and what injures her injures us. This is something that the shamanic or indigenous cultures of the world have always known, but was forgotten or deliberately repressed by the patriarchal religions. Now, there's another thing which is most important, and that is that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were attempting to restore the teachings, the love-wisdom teachings of the first temple that had been banished by the Deuteronomist priests. And these teachings were preserved in the Essene communities in Palestine, fortunately. Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, whom he deeply loved, and both were Essene teachers. Jesus taught the men, and Mary Magdalene taught the women. 11 years after the crucifixion in AD 44, Mary Magdalene traveled to southern France with her children and taught there for 20 years. Their marriage and the existence of their children and the important role that Mary Magdalene played in France as teacher was deliberately concealed by the church in Rome, who made the celibate Son of God the central pillar of the Christian myth and vilified Mary Magdalene as a sinner and a prostitute. This calumny was only removed in 1969 when she was made a saint. There is still a long way to go before women find their authentic, heart-led voice instead of trying to adapt themselves to the values of our superficial, rapacious culture and compete with men. They are beginning to speak up about the obscenity of nuclear weapons, which could wipe out much of the life on Earth. And they are realizing that we need to love and care for the planet if we are to survive. They will apply their great gifts in many fields of action in the next decades of accelerating climate change. Throughout the millennia of the solar era, individual men have loved and valued women, even though their civilizations did not. Countless mothers will have nurtured and encouraged the creative gifts of their sons, leading to the creation of incredible temples and cathedrals, marvelous paintings, carvings, and sculptures, and all the arts, literature, music, and scientific discoveries that have flourished in spite of wars and unimaginable suffering. Women have now entered many professions: medicine, law, psychotherapy, politics, sport, and many others hitherto barred to them, and are bringing their great gifts into the public arena. But they need to know the danger we are in and the vital importance of their feminine voice, speaking up about many issues on which formerly they were silent. In too many areas of the planet, woman's voice is still silenced by male control. We can see what happens to her voice when men like the Taliban or the warriors of Islamic State take over, or even when the cancelling culture in our country, the UK and America, takes over. Now, I need to speak about scientific materialism, which is the current cosmology or belief system that controls our culture, even worldwide culture, and is taught in our schools and universities. It appeared in the 17th century under the influence of Newton and Descartes, and has lasted until the present time, powerfully entrenched in the scientific community and in the media. It promotes the idea that material reality is the only reality. God and the soul are thankfully outgrown superstitions. the neurons of the physical brain are the origin of consciousness. When the physical brain dies, that is the end of us. There is no survival of the soul or consciousness. There are no subtle dimensions of reality. The universe consists of dead matter. There is no transcendent meaning or purpose to our existence. Earth herself has no consciousness in the sense that we have consciousness. And we as observers are separate from our environment. The problem with these beliefs is that if you believe that your consciousness comes from the neurons in your brain and that the earth is not a sentient entity, it leaves the way wide open to exploit, degrade, and devastate it with impunity, which is exactly what we've been doing since the Industrial Revolution. Because they have been indoctrinated into accepting this false ideology as truth, many people have lost all awareness of the existence of another dimension of reality, and they have lost touch with their soul. They're not even aware that they have such a thing. However, quantum physics is giving us a very different picture, something like a second Copernican revolution. We are all individual expressions of cosmic consciousness, part of one cosmic life. All that we call matter is a manifestation of spirit, including ourselves. We are separate individuals on the surface of life, but deeply connected with all aspects of cosmic life in the depths. No matter what our race, nation, gender, or caste, we are all part of one life. In theological language, we are all children of God, and divinity flows through every aspect of the universe. We do not have consciousness, we are consciousness. These astounding discoveries tell us that we are literally bathed in a sea of light, invisible to us, yet permeating every cell of our being. We are not only connected with each other through the astonishing reach of the internet, but through the infinitesimal particles of subatomic matter. In our essence, therefore, we are beings of light, cosmic beings. At the quantum level, all apparently separate aspects of life are connected in one invisible and indivisible whole. We are not separate from the life around us. All life at the deepest level is essentially one, and each one of us is an expression of that one, inseparable from it. So from this perspective, all weapons and acts that destroy the miraculous and infinitely precious life of another human being or injure the life of the planet are no longer tolerable. I think we can all see in the way recent wars have been conducted and the new weapons constantly being prepared by the three major powers, what complete ignorance exists regarding the sacredness of life and the sacredness of the body. The 9 nuclear weapons nations and the 5 NATO nations holding these weapons on their soil can contemplate the annihilation of millions of innocent people and the creation of a nuclear winter. The Muslim fanatics invite martyrdom for their young men and punish apostasy with death. These attitudes and modes of behavior are the result of thousands of years of the habit of war and conquest. At the heart of the cosmos is a love of unimaginable dimensions, a love that sustains the entire universe and is the origin of our own capacity to love, to cherish, to protect, as well as to create through all the different gifts that we carry within our nature. We are not separate from the divinity that we've been worshiping for thousands of years, but are an intrinsic part of its life, its mind, and its soul. We carry divinity within our nature and within every cell of our being. This, I believe, is the new myth or revelation that is slowly coming into being through different individuals. Only when nature, matter, soul, and body, the 4 aspects of the feminine, are recognized as a manifestation of spirit, will we be able to heal our dangerously unbalanced and unconscious culture. If we can accomplish this enormous task, we will enter a new era. Moving to this new level of understanding will be difficult but not impossible, as more and more people get the message that our survival as a species depends on it. Rather than attacking the old, we could assist and facilitate the emergence of the new. Woman's deep intuitive intelligence is vital here, and circles of women communicating with each other can rise to a new level of sacred action together. Now, I would like Ruby to show that one diagram, if you wouldn't mind. This really explains everything that I've been talking about, the three different phases. I'm coming to the third one now. So in the first phase, we had the lunar, the original participation. In the second phase, we had separation and we had dualism and polarization, when the cosmos and God and the world came to be seen as object rather than something that we were part of. Mind and soul became separated. And now we could be moving, if we're conscious enough, into a final phase that I call the stellar phase, when mind and soul are reunited and we have conscious participation in an ensouled universe and union, conscious union with the divine ground. So we are on the cusp of entering this new era that I call the stellar or starry era, or as someone has called it, a new Copernican era, where we can recover our connection to both nature and the cosmos, where consciousness is primary and present in all aspects of life, where men and women can come together to serve the life of the planet, where we realize that there is no death for the soul, and therefore we do not need to fear death. You could take it away now, Ruby, I think, because we don't really need it anymore. This long evolutionary process over some 50,000 years is bringing us to the point where we can know who we are and why we are here on this beautiful blue planet. This is why women's great gifts are so much needed now, and why, if they come together, a great deal can be accomplished in healing old traumas and establishing new patterns of relationship with the planet and with each other, based on love and respect, not rivalry and hatred. It's time to awaken to our immortal souls and to formulate new values which respect life, not to waste time arguing about things that are not important. Women as mothers have been the guardian of these values for tens of thousands of years as they nurtured the lives of their children through the centuries. Think of the countless trillions of meals that women have lovingly prepared for their families over these 50,000 years. Cooking is an alchemical art that deserves the greatest respect. As a wild woman, ask yourself why you have chosen to incarnate on this planet at this time. What gives you the feeling of greatest joy and fulfillment? What are the gifts that you are blessed with that you can develop and use in the service of life? Do you know that you carry divinity in every atom of your being? Are you in touch with your heart, the conduit to your soul? And do you ask yourself, what is the agenda of my soul, and how can I listen to its guidance? For over 70 years, I have treasured these words received by my mother in a channeled message in the 1940s that I will share with you now because they are addressed to all women. I did not understand what they meant then, at the age of 12 or 13, but I understand now. And this is what the message said. The Divine Mother is the Holy Spirit who presides over the new age. Inspired by her, women, through their love and understanding, have been given the task of awakening in humanity the compassion and devotion to life taught by me at the beginning of the Piscean age. Man, through woman, will realize in himself a sense of his mission on earth and see clearly as in a mirror the law of the universe. So I will end there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Anne. I feel that was an extraordinary talk from you, and I feel really, honoured to have been able to be here. And I read that earlier this week, and I feel like it's some of the most important words that I've heard in a very long time. And I'm sure everyone else here agrees with me. And I love to hear you describe cooking as a sacred art. The amount of meals. Sorry, I'm talking over you.
No, it's an alchemical art. It's alchemy. Transforming something into something else, something incredible. I'm not a marvelous cook. I wish I were, but in my next life, I should take a course in cooking.
That's fantastic. Now, I'd love to hear some questions from people. I wondered, while people are just, there's lots of comments coming in and just saying how much they really enjoyed your talk. Actually, there's a question here from Sarah Poet, who is actually one of our speakers coming up in the next few weeks. So Sarah says, what are the new economic systems that Anne sees coming forward with more women's collectives arising?
I think this will happen over the next 10 to 30 years as things get more difficult, and there's need for people to engage more in public activities, really. Possibly there'll be communities that will need to organize themselves to get food and care for the sick. There'll be a very big change, I think, but I can't say definitely exactly what it will be. I just know that there will be changes and that women will be a great part of it.
Thank you, Anne. And another question here from Julie Goring, which says, can you speak to the trauma to men in the solar era, and how do we support that healing?
Well, men have had a deep trauma to the feminine aspect of their nature, to their feelings and to their heart, because they had to repress anything to do with that in order to be the warriors that they were expected to be through all these centuries. Young men aspired to be warriors, and to be a warrior, you couldn't allow yourself to feel fear, or you had to overcome fear. You couldn't allow yourself to be pity for the people you were killing. There are, enormous implications here of hardening the heart of men so that they were capable of being warriors and killers, basically. And their mothers would have brought them up probably very gently and tenderly, and all of a sudden they would have been precipitated into this world of having to take part in the wars and battles and things up to our own time. Look at the wars in the last century. Look what's going on now in the Middle East. And this sacrifice, it was literally a human sacrifice of young men all the way through that was accepted, and their suffering was buried because it couldn't be expressed. I have a video on my website about the anima and the animus, and how men were really extinguished in their hearts, if you like. And it's very difficult. They were brought up, my father was brought up, my grandfather, never to express their feelings, always to serve the king and the country, never to think about what their own feelings might have been, never to dare to express them. They were sent away often to boarding school at the age of 7 or 8. And that in itself was a crucifixion of their feelings. So I won't go on, but it's a very deep trauma, and women need to recognize the hurt that men have had to endure through these thousands and thousands of years.
Is there anything else, Anne, that you can say on that in terms of how we can help them in this healing?
Well, not by attacking them and trying to be rivals with them, for one thing. Not being threatening to them, but approaching them with love and understanding and listening to them, because now actually men do express their feelings much more, and they are able to express them. And we find this in sports, people who win these marvelous things in Japan and everything. They are expressing their feelings of pride and pleasure and joy and empathy with other men too, the men that they're playing games with or working with or whatever it might be. There's a much more empathy expressed now than was in my mother's generation or grandmother's generation, definitely.
Great. There's a question here from Adva Lily, who says, do you know communities still alive that have kept their goddess traditions?
Well, the indigenous peoples have kept that sacredness of the earth right the way through. They've never lost it, despite appalling persecution by us, I may say. when you look at North and South America, appalling persecution in the 16th century, wiping out of whole indigenous communities. But they survived, and they're very vociferous now, and many of them are very gifted speakers. Some of them I would bring forward if I do this television that I'm planning. I would invite them to speak about these values that they've kept alive with great care in rituals and passing things down from parent to child over thousands of years. So we owe them a very great debt of gratitude that they were able to do this. And we need to turn to them now for their wisdom, definitely.
Great. Another question, what is the role of Jungian psychology in this new age that you describe?
Well, if it wasn't for Jungian psychology, I wouldn't be able to speak in the way that I am, because I had depressions from the age of about 15, and I had those until I began to write, about 40 or even later, 50 years later. Jungian psychology takes you into the depths that have been split off, the feminine depths of the psyche, and you have to make a journey there. You have to leave your conscious, rational self and go on this journey through your dreams and through the help of the analyst to understand what has been repressed and lost in not only in yourself, but in the culture as a whole. So that, to me, Jung saw this. He foresaw the difficulties we would be coming into now. He knew through his own dreams that he had a great task to complete. He felt he'd failed, but he didn't fail. What he actually brought to the culture is the recovery of the feminine value. And I've been spokesman for that since I had a vision of the goddess when I was about 45. And that was so striking and so stupendous that it changed my life and enabled me to write about all this. So I have a great trust in Jungian psychology. Although, like all people, Jungians can get tangled up in power struggles and make many mistakes. But on the whole, the message is there.
Fantastic. And Rachel Forster's asking us, do you have a daily devotion ritual or a way of connecting to this task, new way or vision of the future?
My way is through writing, and through the time I spend daily in writing. I don't really do a meditation because by the time I've thought of what food to get for the day and how to cook it and seeing to all the things like the garden and whatever needs to be done, I don't have time for meditation. But my meditation is when I sit down at my desk and I communicate with my writing and try and make it better or make it more clear, communicating with people.
And at that point, I'd just like to bring in a quote that I've read from you, which I feel in a way just takes your talk about the awakening of this new era and how it's going to change us all to a very personal level. And you said in a piece that you wrote before that in accepting her depression, her suffering, her loneliness, her longing to outgrow the inarticulateness and powerlessness of her past existence, woman may accomplish something truly heroic and extraordinary in life, something which humanity in centuries to come will recognize and cherish. Each woman who gives birth to herself and responds to what life is asking her to accomplish contributes to the survival of our species and the diminishment of human suffering. And for this reason, nothing is of such value or of such importance as a woman's rescue of herself. And I just wondered if you could speak to that a bit, because in a way, that's sort of what we are doing daily is like attending to ourselves. And I wonder if you might just want to expand on that a bit.
It's a totally different focus from what we've had. For a woman to pay attention to herself, to her heart, to her feelings, to her childhood suffering, what might have happened in her childhood with difficult parents, rejection at school, possibly, all kinds of things that may have been buried, traumas buried in her personal unconscious, because that's a Jungian term, a personal unconscious. And really spending time healing herself and getting help if she needs to see a therapist. If she carries great anger and bitterness, then she needs to see a therapist, because you need help with that, and it can't be done by the family or by partner or whatever. So there has been a great deal of emphasis on therapy in the last 40, 50 years, particularly in America, but to some extent in this country also. So I would just urge women to take time to care for themselves, to love themselves, and to feel They are of supreme importance for the planet and to connect with the planet. And I'm guided by what I call the Holy Spirit, and that's the feminine aspect of deity, which I came from the dream that I had and from the fact that this was what we need to recover. So I asked the Holy Spirit, what should I do next? What would you like me to do? How would you like me to formulate this talk? How would you like me to relate to people in my community or with you, for instance? What would be the best way of coming together with people and being able to give out my gifts? Because every woman has a gift of some kind. And it takes time to discover that gift. I didn't know when I was 18 that I would be capable of what I'm doing now, because it's like an acorn that grows into an oak, and you have to nurture that oak as you grow into maturity and not push yourself, above all, not push yourself to achieve things, because that is a trap that women have been led into by copying the male model. And it's very important that when they catch themselves saying, I must achieve this, I must be that, I must be better, I must be cleverer, I must be more famous, I must be a celebrity, I must do this, that, and the other, go to Love Island. All that is crap and needs to be dropped, and just concentrate on what your gift is and how you can bring it forth and how you can love yourself more. Okay?
Fantastic, Anne. I've got another question here from Becca Rose, and she says, there are so many references to motherhood. What does it mean to be a woman and not a mother? Are there any archetypes for this?
Yes, there's the archetype of Artemis in the Greek mythology, who was not married and who was guardian of the animals of the forest. So that would be a very good model. And I'm sure that there are other ones you can find. There's a woman called, a Jungian Analyst called Jean Shinoda Bolen, who has written books about this, Goddesses in Every Woman, and she's teaching all the time. So if you look up Jean Shinoda Bolen, that's Bolen, you can learn a lot from her and from her teachings and her books. But certainly Artemis is a role model of the woman who's not married. And many women now choose not to marry and have children because they don't see a great happiness coming in the future for children. So that's to be respected and not criticized.
We actually have Jean joining us later in the course. And so she'll
wonderful teacher.
She'll be talking in 2 weeks about these archetypes. So that's great to be able to take that a bit further. We have so many questions. So we have 48 questions, which we're not going to get round to, but I just put a few more to you. And I apologize to everybody who I can't actually ask the rest of them, but we have here, we've sort of covered this a bit, but I think it's such an important thing. I'll come back to it. Just seeing, it's Claire Russell, and she says, what are your top tips and suggestions for staying connected, open, listening, and living in the yin feminine in a system of patriarchal energy?
Take time out of your busy day to just sit with yourself saying, am I happy or am I unhappy in what I'm doing? If you're unhappy in what you're doing, then try and change the pattern. If you're in the wrong job and it's making you stressed and miserable, get out of it and change and try and move into another kind of profession or another kind of action that you could do. Ask what your great gifts are. And I like to imagine a woman sitting in a rose garden and seeing her heart as a rose and gradually making the connection with the rose in her heart and asking it because that is your soul, asking the soul, what would you like me to do? If I'm feeling unhappy, how can I help myself to be happier? How can I make myself more fulfilled? But there's a great, I must mention this because in my lifetime, there's been a tremendous emphasis on getting women out into the world, into the workplace. And there's been a repression of the mother side. There's been a contempt for being mother, so to speak. That went all through my 20s and 30s. That is fortunately changing because women are finding ways of doing both, maybe at different phases in their life. But it's a question of timing, thought, reflection, and tuning into this deeper level and staying with it, not running away and copying the models offered by the culture, which are absolutely terrible.
And I'm just going to put two more questions to you. There's quite a few people interested in your vision of the goddess, and asking if you can expand on that, and how did you access it, and what did it look like, and your soul, how did your soul communicate this to you?
Well, when I was about 45, I had this visionary dream, or was a vision really, when I was in analysis with a Jungian woman called Hella Adler. And the dream was this, and I'll tell it to you because if there's time. I came round the edge of a dolmen, of an enormous dolmen like Stonehenge, into a totally different landscape. And the landscape was all green corn. And I was gliding over the surface of the corn with my bare feet, going for mile after this marvelous field of corn, until I came to a full stop. I couldn't go any further. And there were two hills, and stretched between, and on top of the hills were two men, and between them was a net, a gigantic net, which I was caught in and had to lay down and looking up at the sky. And the men were not in any way threatening, they were just holding the net. But I was caught in the net, which I think is the net of incarnation, but I didn't realize it at the time. And I looked up at the sky and I saw this wonderful, enormous, naked figure of a woman, who was obviously a goddess, stretching from the earth to the distant heavens, and she was gigantic. She had long flowing hair, but no clothes, and she had a great wheel in her abdomen. And she told me to look down at my abdomen, and I had a wheel too, but mine was over on the left. And she more or less said to me, get your wheel in the middle, that's your task. Getting your wheel in the middle is really centering yourself on a task or a mission or a particular kind of living of life in which you pay attention to what this labyrinth or wheel in the abdomen means, which is the instinct, the gut instinct, that's the place of it, so to speak, and following the directions that gives you through your life, which is really an aspect of the soul, the deepest aspect of the soul. So that was my awakening dream, if you like, which changed my life because I had to stop trying to be what I thought I was trying to be and just pay attention to that vision. And I asked, who was she? Was she Demeter? Was she Athena? Was she the Shekinah of Kabbalah? And in the end, I think she was the Holy Spirit in the feminine form, divinity in feminine form. And that's what I have taken as my guidance to this day, really, becoming more and more conscious of it as I've gone along. I'm now nearly 90, and it's taken me 50 years since I was 45 sort of thing, to really integrate all this and not be inflated by it, because the danger with a vision like that is that you think you're God yourself and you go around saying, listen to me, I'm the prophet sort of thing. So you have to avoid that pitfall and remain very human and very down to the earth, practical, doing things like cooking and gardening. Making things with your hands is a wonderful antidote to being inflated.
So we have time, Anne, to realize these things ourselves, you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. You're given time, and the more you're in touch, the more time you have, I think, really, because you relax. You're not pushed and shoved towards a goal that you don't really need to achieve.
Okay, one last question. What is your view of the movement to empower women by encouraging them to access the tools and power of the patriarchy? For those of us who are focused on bringing forth the wild feminine, what is the best way to meet or engage with this movement, which has so much institutional money and clout behind it?
That's a very difficult question. I don't think I can answer it. You have to equip yourself, as I've equipped myself, with a good education. You have to know what you're doing, and you have to get into the culture. You can't stay outside, I don't think. You have to take a job of some kind or work of some kind in your 20s and 30s so that you gain experience of life, because you need that experience before you can really put forth your great gifts. And all that time you can be nurturing your gifts and thinking, what can I do? You don't have to join the patriarchy, but you have to learn to get along with it, because there's no point saying, well, I'm not going to have anything to do with it, because we are living within it. And patriarchy needs our help, because men are as stuck as we've been. They need help in finding.
The gender is much more complex than
and
just a female.
You can see that happening as men gradually have to grasp the fact that the climate is changing. It's at first it's beyond belief, then it just becomes acceptable, and then finally, like with Sir David Attenborough, it becomes a life task.
And thank you. I'd just like to come to the end of your talk by rereading a passage that I was lucky enough to be able to pull out before you started. And I just wanted to put it out to everybody there because it's so important. And you say, as a wild woman, ask yourself why you've chosen to incarnate on this planet at this time. What gives you the feeling of greatest joy? What are the gifts that you are blessed with that you can develop and use in this life? Do you know you carry divinity in every atom of your being? Are you in touch with your heart, the conduit of your soul? And do you ask yourself, what is the agenda of my soul and how can I listen to its guidance? So these are the words that you've brought us tonight, and along with many, many other incredible parts of your talk. So I'd just like to thank you, and I'm sure everybody would like to join in thanking you for being here tonight. And I know that next month is your 90th birthday. So I'd just like to wish you a very happy birthday from everybody here.
Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure and a privilege to speak to you. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for all those questions. I'm so sorry we didn't get around to putting them all to Anne, but I'm sure we can find a way of doing so and finding some answers for you that we can send out to you. But I'd now like to introduce our second speaker, who is the wonderful Liz Childs Kelly. And Liz grew up in Georgia in the USA, and she says that she was very interested in God from an early age, and she demanded to be baptized age 6. But as she got older, she couldn't find what she was looking for in Christianity. And in her 20s, she started practicing yoga and became interested in other religions. However, it was only when she came across the divine feminine that she had her aha moment, and she realized that she found what she was looking for. Alongside all of this, like many of us, Liz went to university where she graduated with a master's in communications and opened her own successful marketing consultancy. And this was very much, and this is a bit I mean by when I say like the rest of us, she really thought that her success as a woman needed to come through from the rational business world. It was only after the birth of her second child, which she describes as a painful but extraordinarily spiritual experience, that she realized she wanted to pursue a different path. Today, Liz lives in rural Virginia on the ancestral lands of the Monacan people with her husband and 2 children, and is a writer, an initiated priestess in the 13 Moon Lineage, and the founder of the very popular podcast, Home to Her, which is dedicated to amplifying the voices of the sacred feminine. It's a job description that I know gets a lot of very strange looks at the school gates when she tells people what she does. She is currently completing her first book, which is titled Home to Her, Reclaiming the Ancient Wisdom of the Sacred Feminine. Liz, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. I'll let you take it from here.
Oh, thank you so much, Fran. So I consider myself, first and foremost, a really passionate student of the sacred feminine. And so my head was spinning a bit when I found out I had to follow one of my most important teachers, Anne Baring. Her work has truly had quite an impact on me. And, you know, Fran referenced, even now, on the sidelines of my kids' soccer games, you know, if I try to tell them what I do, I'll get kind of a funny look, because this conversation about the sacred feminine and the wild feminine, it's, at least for me, it is not just every day. So I can only imagine what it was like writing about this and compiling the kind of information that Anne and so many of my teachers did when they did it. So much, much, much gratitude for you. I certainly wouldn't be here without you. So I named my podcast Home to Her. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk with you all about today, I was thinking of that name, Home to Her, because for me, this claiming of sacred feminine wisdom has been very much a homecoming. And I realize how cliche that is. I know it's said a lot, but in this case, it really is, it's true. It's been a homecoming in terms of returning to stories and history that I had no idea how badly I needed, and a return to a different way of being that the best way I can describe feels like kind of a giant sigh, and a way of coming home to wisdom that I already have. So I have a sense that this 12-week journey for you is that, however that's going to be for you. And I thought for my part, it might be helpful to tell you a little bit about the ways in which I approach and understand what the sacred feminine even is, how I wrap my head around that. And as I do that, I want to acknowledge that there's this real tension here between the mind, right? There's a lot of stuff that we can talk about with the brain that to feed the brain it engages our intellect, and that's useful. And then there is also this side that is much more mystical, which I would say is probably even more important, my experience of the sacred feminine on that side, than it has been all the ways in which I've fed my brain, which I have loved. So I guess I want to ask you to hold that tension with me. I want to talk to you about things that will feed your brain, and I want to talk to you about the mystical too. And to kind of hold that both of those things can feed us and be really, really valuable as we're understanding the sacred feminine. So my journey, as much as it's been fueled by learning, has also been very much a mystical experience. And I think in some ways it had to happen that way because I was so deeply entrenched in a way of being in the world. Everything that I had been taught growing up reinforced this Western capitalist paradigm that the way that I was supposed to succeed was first academically and then financially. I would have told you that I was a feminist, a very proud feminist, but in a way that was unconscious for me, in a way that I didn't understand. Being a feminist meant showing up and succeeding in spaces that were not open to my mother's generation and certainly not my grandmother's generation, without any awareness of questioning those frameworks and whether or not those structures were where I needed to be, where my soul wanted to be, and whether or not those structures were built with women in mind, period. I owned my own consulting company and was very, very committed to growing it. All of my employees were women, and that was not on purpose. It just kind of happened that way. Most of my clients were women. Through my company, we funded a scholarship for girls, and I was on the board of a nonprofit for women's career development. So I really felt like I was doing everything I could to advance women as best I understood. And then I went to a business conference about 8 years ago, and I was there to win new clients. That was my job. And I was there with 5,000 other women. And at the very beginning, a woman came on stage, and her name is Dr. Elizabeth Kapualani Lindsay. She's Native Hawaiian, and she's the first Polynesian National Geographic Fellow and an anthropologist. And she was speaking about Indigenous wisdom. And she's traveled all over the world, but specifically on this day, she was talking about the wisdom of Pacific Island sailors. Specifically, these sailors that could sail thousands of miles between islands without any of the modern instrumentation that European navigators had used to travel. And so she talked about the oral tradition of the way these teachings were handed down. Which was generation after generation after generation. I'm seeing some questions. Dr. Elizabeth Kapualani Lindsay. If you don't know how, I can't spell Kapualani for you, but if you Google Dr. Elizabeth Lindsay, you'll find her. So she talked about oral traditions, how these teachings were passed down in that way. And she talked about how extensive their training was and how closely they had to be focused to the elements. But then she said something kind of like this. She said, they were so in tune with the wisdom of their own hearts that they could travel thousands of miles just by watching the way the waves broke across the front of their boats. And when she said that, something happened to me. I started getting hot from my feet all the way up to the top of my head. And I started getting really tingly. And the room started kind of doing the shimmering and receding thing. And it felt like my ears had been plugged with wax. I couldn't hear very well for a moment or two. I don't know how long this lasted. I just remember very distinctly turning to my right and looking at the woman sitting beside me who I just said hello to 10 minutes earlier and wondering if she was having the same experience. And she looked totally normal, like it was any other day. But for me, that moment was a definitive before and after. It felt like some kind of veil had come down, like I had been exposed to something that I didn't know was there. I guess maybe the best way to describe it is if anybody's seen the old movie, The Wizard of Oz, and Dorothy is there in Kansas and it's black and white. And then all of a sudden she ends up in Oz and everything's in Technicolor. And, you know, she didn't even know that Technicolor existed. That's how it felt. And I remember having this distinct question rise up in me. What if that kind of knowledge exists within me? And as soon as it came up, I already knew the answer. I knew it. So I left the business conference that day. I didn't win any new clients. I was completely and totally distracted. And I started working on educating myself. I started with learning about these Polynesian navigators, wayfinders. Now, some people might know the Disney movie Moana put this concept on the map for a lot of people that didn't know, but this was before that. So I started learning about that and I started trying to find what I could about, that eventually led me to indigenous wisdom traditions. And I have to acknowledge I was very clunky in this. My teachers were mostly anthropologists. I was reading anthropologists who were going out, who were white anthropologists going out and studying other cultures and perhaps living with those cultures. I didn't understand at the time. I didn't have the framework to understand that there's a difference between that and, you know, being native, coming from that culture. So however clunky it was, though, it gave me an opening to start seeing the world in a different way than the way that I had been trained and taught to look at it. But it wasn't until my second child was born, which was several months later, I was pregnant with him at the business conference, that I started to understand that there was a feminine component to this. I didn't see that at all. And with my second child, I really wanted to have a natural delivery. My first child, I had been medicated and I wasn't present for a lot of it. So I wanted to be present for this, fully present for this. And it was awful. It was horribly excruciating. But it was another opening of sorts of understanding this different way of being in the world. And I specifically learned about the notion of surrender and what happens when we let go of this false idea of control in the way we're holding on, and how we are able to dance with this life force energy that I think wants to move through all of us, whether we are giving birth or not. But in this case, in me, this life force energy that wanted to move through me to bring this child into the world, and that I could dance with it. I didn't have to fight it, but I could be in service with it and we could dance together. And that was incredible. And in that moment, as awful as it was, I felt this incredible, incredible connection to all the women that had come before me in giving birth. I felt connected to this long line, and it was spectacular. So I went home after that with my new baby. And when you have a new baby, you're sleepless and you also have a lot of time on your hands. And so I was thinking a lot about the spiritual nature of childbirth and how I had never encountered this concept. And so Fran referenced at the beginning, she's right. I was sort of this closeted spiritual seeker from a young age. But I had also been trained that, to highly educated people don't bother too much with spiritual stuff. Anne referred to this as this whole scientific materialism thing. Like, that's a little, we're supposed to have outgrown that. So it was always kind of in the background for me. But at this time, I went back and I started thinking about everything that I had been taught and all the things that I had learned. And all the way back to when I was a child. And one day it just really clicked for me. Well, the God that I was taught about was male, and his favored child was male. And that favored child's most trusted companions were men. And the people standing up in the pulpit telling me about that on Sunday morning, they were men. And even fast forwarding, to when I had taken meditation courses and wanted to learn about Buddhism, my teachers were mostly men. The people writing the books that I was reading were men. And they could not tell me about something that they had not experienced. And so my first reaction to that was one of despair. At first I felt like somehow that the divine didn't find my experiences as important as others. But then almost immediately I realized there is no way. There is no way that that's right. That cannot be right. I knew from my own experiences, this intuitive experience I'd had at the business conference, my experience bringing this child into the world, the reading that I had done, however clunky it might have been and not, it all had opened me up to this different way of being. And I knew for a fact that there had to be a female aspect of God. I absolutely knew it. And I knew that it was something that was very, very, very important to my soul's evolution to learn about this in this lifetime. And so I ended up selling my consulting company. It took me a while to do that. And then I had to take a couple years and really fall apart, honestly. I had so much identity built into this being a successful businesswoman, and I had to let that all crumble. And I allowed myself to be guided towards this sacred feminine wisdom. And that was a very mystical path. There were books that came to me. Anne's book is certainly one of them. There were several. But I also worked directly with an intuition teacher for many years. And I studied body-based wisdom, and I studied energy medicine, and I completed a mystery school initiation. And a couple of years ago, I started this podcast because I so desperately wanted to be in conversation with other women and men about this topic and to share that with others because it's had such a profound impact on me personally. So I want to say something that Anne referenced when she was answering questions. I talked about this moment that I had at the business conference, and I think this is important to state. That was a huge, huge moment for me. And I think it happened not because I am in any way special, but because I needed that loud of a wake-up call. I was so entrenched. There was nothing in my culture, my family, my friends, my workplace. There was nothing, not even the religious experiences I'd had up to that point. There was nothing in those experiences that were going to bump me out of this Western capitalist paradigm. I needed something big, and it needed to be dramatic in that way. And I think that's why it happened that way. And I also want to acknowledge that it was Indigenous wisdom, a woman speaking about Indigenous wisdom, that also gave me this other way of being, because that kind of wisdom, as Anne spoke to very clearly in my own lineage, is not, it's a lot harder to find. So that wisdom was incredibly helpful for me in putting me on my path. So I want to talk to you about a few ways in which I know and experience the sacred feminine as a way to kind of wrap our heads around it. But before we do that, I want to address this language, the sacred feminine. I know for this course, Ruby and Christabel, they're calling this the wild feminine. Divine feminine is other language I've heard. I want to tell you why I say sacred feminine. I chose the word sacred specifically because for me, the word divine, because of the way I was raised, it's still got a hangover of the monotheistic, one male God standing over everything. It's got that hangover to it. And it implies that, for me anyways, that the divine is something that's way out here, that it's not a part of me. I certainly think that the sacred feminine is so much larger than me. And I think that she lives within me. I think she lives within all of us. I think she lives within every single blade of grass. And so for me, using the word sacred feels like it encompasses all of that. I also will say that it's easier for me to imagine finding the sacred in myself sometimes than the divine, especially on a bad day. And certainly people who challenge me, it's easier to find the sacred in them than the divine in them. So that's another reason why I use that word. I also think that the word sacred allows us to circumvent some of these questions. I'll talk about this just a little bit later. When you look back on some of the history of the goddess, we can get all caught up in it. Is that a goddess? Is it not? Like, well, it doesn't really, to me, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that this is a sacred representation of female form. So that's another reason why I use that word. Now, the word feminine, it's got its own host of issues, right? Way back when I first started thinking about this, I realized that the place that I was most likely to see the word feminine was at the drugstore in the feminine hygiene products aisle. Truly. Like it's attached to something that's a dirty little secret, because we don't want to talk about the fact that, you know, some women bleed every month. But it's also got a lot of baggage related to it, right? There's a lot of outdated gender stereotypes that are attached to it that I think a lot of us would like to see disappear. And certainly today, it opens up a bigger question of, well, what does feminine mean? And if you're going to ask that, what does it mean to be a woman? Is that tied up solely in my genitals, in my uterus, in the fact that I use that uterus to have a child, to have 2 children? I have no interest in defining what it means to be a woman for anyone else. I am not qualified to do that. And I don't think it's my right to do that. I also would say that my training and experience with sacred feminine wisdom has taught me, if anything, to get more fluid, to get less rigid. Anything that I'm trying to put in a really hard and fast square box, I don't feel like I am in the territory that she has led me into. There's an invitation with sacred feminine wisdom, at least from my perspective, to play with fixed reality, to play with it. So all that said, I find that I have a really hard time letting go of the word feminine. I don't want to let it go. And this is why. It is truly a historical fact, very well documented, that female identified bodies, attributes, and experiences have been treated lesser than male bodies, attributes, and experiences for thousands of years. It's a fact. And by holding on to that word and putting sacred right beside it, that feels like a very radical and subversive act to say, I don't accept that. I do not accept that for myself, for you, for anyone else. I also think it's an invitation for us to look at the parts of ourselves that we have pushed away, especially the feminine parts that we have said are not acceptable, and invite them back in, both personally and culturally. And as far as I'm concerned, that conversation is complementary to a conversation about the gender binary and whether or not that's serving us. I think those conversations can coexist together. And I think we are capable of having more than one conversation at a time. So that is where I stand on that. And that's why I use the language, the sacred feminine. Now, I don't think that she, sacred feminine, divine feminine, goddess, whatever you want to call her, really cares what you call her, honestly. I don't think she cares. So if that language doesn't work for you, let it go. Use something else. So I want to give you 4 ways in which I could tell you more, but yeah, that's enough. I think that's plenty for you to hear from me. 4 ways in which I know the sacred feminine in the way I experience her. And the first one is the one that I think is so important, at least for me. And Anne has spoken to this so beautifully, but she is a historical fact. And it breaks my heart that there is this massive body of information out there that women like Anne and others have done and compiled, telling us about our sacred history that so many of us don't know. It breaks my heart that I had a graduate degree and it was almost 40 years old when this information came into my life. And I was like a seeker, a spiritual seeker. So I think it's so important that we know this. And I want to show you just a few things. Next week, Max Deshoe is going to be with you of Suppressed Histories Archives. She's been on my podcast. I adore her. She is, as far as I am concerned, a living treasure. And such a wealth of information about this. So you will certainly be able to hear more about this, but I just want to show you a few things. These are from things that I've seen that I think are helpful in just knowing the history of the sacred feminine. So let's see if I can share my screen with you here and if this is going to work. Okay, somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see this. Okay, awesome. So Anne already told you, she referenced 30,000 years ago. We have evidence of the feminine being treated as sacred going all the way back to 30,000 years ago. This that I'm showing you here is, well, it's colloquially, I'm messing up that word, whatever. It's known as the Venus of LaSalle. If you Google it, that's what you'll find. That word Venus has nothing to do with her. It was thrown on these collection of images by 20th century male archaeologists kind of as a joke. A more appropriate word would be goddess, or if we don't know she's a goddess, we can call her the woman of LaSalle. But this was found carved outside of a cave in the Dordogne region of France. She's almost 30,000 years old. And some of the characteristics that you see here are very typical of other figurines that have been found from the Paleolithic era. They've been found spread across thousands of geographic miles and across thousands of years. So let's see if you can see my pointer here. Yeah, so this is her face here. Her hair is kind of over her. I think that's her right shoulder, and her head is turned towards what looks like kind of a horn, but it's also been interpreted as a crescent moon. You've got 13 notches on it, which Anne spoke to the importance of lunar time. Well, here you go, right here. This is what you're seeing, 13 lunar cycles in a year. So this is probably indicating how time passed, and may also refer to women's menstrual cycles, because before the advent of modern electricity, women were thought to have bled with the moon. A lot of these figurines are more ample-bodied women. So you can see her breasts are not perky, and some people haven't interpreted her to be pregnant. I don't know about that. When I see her though, it looks like a mother who's birthed a lot of children. She's done well by her babies. So if you look at this, I believe this image is actually on the cover of Anne's book, The Myth of the Goddess. And so if you go looking for sacred feminine history, you probably find her, which is fantastic. She's one of my favorites. This is from the museum. There's a museum in Bordeaux. So I actually took this picture 4 years ago when I was there. But one that I did not know about at all until I got to Bordeaux was this one. And I'm really hoping you can see it. It's a little blurry. I took the picture myself. This image is thought to be the oldest image we have of a woman giving birth. It is 30,000 years old, thought to be. And so if you see here, here's her head, breast here, and her legs are kind of up here. And then if you look like just underneath her, you've got this almost mirror image of a body emerging out from under her. Now, the museum in Bordeaux, the placard beside her clearly states in the text that this is thought to be one of the oldest images that we have of a woman giving birth. And yet, do you know what this is named in the museum? It's named the two characters, or the playing card. So I want you to let that sink in. I told you that I went seeking the spiritual stories of childbirth, and here we have it. 30,000 years ago, my ancestors knew that this was important. It was so important they were carving it outside of cave walls. And at this point in time, we're still burying this amazing fact by not talking about it and by putting placards on it that identify it as two characters. That is mind-boggling to me. And I think such a testament as to why we need this history, why we need to know this. It is part of our sacred past. And it tells us that we as humans were doing way more things than building empires and killing people and destroying the earth. So I'm going to fast forward way in history. This is a collection of goddess figurines from the Heraklion Archaeology Museum. It's in Crete. I also went there in 2017. And this is just one case of many cases that they have of goddess figurines. So many. This is probably, I don't have the exact date, but I think this is 7th, 8th century BCE, before Common Era. And this particular culture has so much evidence of worship of the divine feminine. And here, this clearly seems to be either goddess figurines or priestesses, because the arms are raised in, invocation. But there is so much evidence of the divine feminine from this part of the world. And so this is 28-ish, I don't know, I'm not doing good on math here, but many thousands of years into the future. So we're talking about something that's not a blip on the screen. Now, I fast forward way into history here. And I think one thing that's important to talk about with the divine feminine too, is that we can get this idea that she is part of our way past. And Anne referenced this a little bit, but this is a sculpture of Guadalupe. This is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I took this picture last year. I didn't have a good one, so you get to see my kids too. But Guadalupe was thought to be apparition of the Virgin Mary that appeared to the peasant Juan Diego in Mexico in the 1500s on top of a hill. And what is less talked about is that that hill was known to be sacred to a Mayan goddess named Tenantzin, and she was known as an earth mother. And so very likely Guadalupe was in fact Tenantzin and was simply being folded in by the colonizers' view of their religion and created in the imagery of Mary. And this was only 500 years ago. So yes, we have this really old history of the sacred feminine. And yes, a lot of that was destroyed, and she has found a way to keep going. She found a way to keep going. Let me stop the share here now. And there's also a writer named Sherry Mitchell. She's Penobscot, so she's Indigenous American. And she has written about how when missionaries discovered her people, they translated their word for Great Spirit into their own language. And because they had only a framework of a male god, they turned it into Great Spirit as a male. However, when you translate the original word back into their language, it literally means the one who holds all the eggs, and that is female. So this kind of leads me to my second point. I said first, knowing her as a historical fact is really important, is that she's not dead. She is a living and vibrant tradition. I think some of the most obvious ways we can see that in our own culture, or my culture, let me specify, is in the devotion to Mary, the Virgin Mary. She is certainly taken on all the aspects of the goddess before her. Now, the Catholic Church has tried to deny her aspect as a deity, but that is exactly what she is. I mean, I learned this from Anne, among other people. I mean, Mary's name means of the sea. Which is many of the older goddesses have connections to the water, are said to have risen from the water, or are the water themselves. Even the Rosary prayer, which if anybody who's Catholic may know that prayer has certainly been weaponized in many ways, but even that says, Holy Mary, Mother of God. Well, what is the Mother of God if not a deity in her own right? In Chimayo, New Mexico, let's see if I can show you this. There is a shrine to Guadalupe. Let's see if I can find it here. But there's also, at this little church in New Mexico, there is a hole in the middle of the church where people go and they pray to the dirt. They pray to the dirt for miraculous healing. They bring their rosaries. This is one grotto. I can't even tell you how many there are like this. And I don't know how often they take this down and change it every year, where people bring their rosaries. They bring their prayers to the Holy Mother, but they also go and they pray to the dirt. They eat the dirt. You take it home. And they have all of these testaments to the amazing miracles that have happened there. And so here is Guadalupe, Mary, but people are also praying to the dirt. So there's Tenantzin. She's still there. She's not dead. And then we see this in other ways too. We certainly see this with, in Ireland, St. Bridget. You know, Bridget was a goddess before her. She's one of those that was able to be absorbed into the Catholic Church. Certainly in India and Hinduism, there is a very vibrant tradition of honoring the divine feminine. And that's been there for some time. And it's very familiar to both male and female. And then in African traditional religions as well, you see this not only in Africa, but you know, you see how people have embraced these goddesses, even in voodoo. Yamaya is a goddess from the Yoruba tradition. She's honored in Brazil on February 2nd, which is interestingly enough also the feast day for St. Bridget. I love to find these connections. So anyways, all of this is to say that I think it's a mistake to talk about the sacred feminine as being completely dead. She's not. She is not dead. There are certainly indigenous cultures that have held on to her, and we have much to learn from them, for sure. But she's alive and well. All right, so she's a historical fact. She's alive and well. The third thing I want to say is that she is the earth, the earth. And there's so many stories, right? We have the language Mother Nature, Mother Earth. We use that even now. There's so many cultures that know this and have honored the divine feminine, the sacred feminine as the earth. Pachamama is a South American term. We have, I mean, Gaia, certainly from the Greeks. There's so many that we could reference. And the thing that really resonates for me with that, there's a couple of things. One is, you know, I learned this concept again from Anne and from others, this idea of the divine feminine, the sacred feminine, being not just outside of us, not just transcendent above us, but present in all living things, immanent within everything. And when we embrace the sacred feminine as the earth, we see that and we feel that. She's under our feet all the time. And because of that, she is real. So we can talk about her as an abstract concept all day, and there's a lot to talk about there, but she is also real. I have a dear friend who has written a book, her name's Perdita, called The Way of the Rose, and it's about the pre-Christian traditions of praying the rosary. And she has said, if you want to know if she is real, pick up your foot and put it down. There she is. There she is. The witch and the activist Starhawk has said, when people ask me if I believe in the goddess, I say, do you believe in rocks? I mean, there she is. She's alive. She's real. And I think because of that, it's such an opportunity to know her, to get to know her. Yes, we can bury ourselves in books and we can dedicate ourselves to a lineage. We can do all that. And we can also walk outside and sit on her and listen. It is that easy. We just have to remember how to do it. Okay, the last thing I want to say, and then I'll stop. For me, the sacred feminine represents a path to wholeness. And I want to be clear here. I said a path to wholeness. I didn't say the path to wholeness, because I think that in indigenous cultures that have survived colonial onslaught and have living traditions still, there are beautiful teachings about how to honor all of life as being sacred. There is a balance between masculine and feminine energy that exists there. For me, however, my culture, my lineage, the sacred feminine is my path back to wholeness. She is the counterbalance to all the toxic mess that I got from patriarchy. and from the Western cultural paradigm that I have been indoctrinated with. And one way that I like to think about this is I like to play a little game of opposites. Like, what does this patriarchal paradigm represent? Well, she's probably the opposite. So, for example, when I think of patriarchal paradigms, I think of order and control. We want to, like, keep everything under lock. Well, she, for me, she's the chaos of creativity. It's all happening. It's all fluid. It's all beautiful. Patriarchal paradigm, to me, talks about judgment. There's that God. There's that guy up in the sky sitting on his cloud, passing judgment on whether or not we've been good. Whereas she is about oneness and finding the beauty in all of us. Patriarchal paradigms about hierarchy. We stick humans at the top, everybody else is down here, and then we rank our humans too as to who's the most important. Whereas the sacred feminine has taught me that all of life is sacred, and that my life is truly no more important than the spider. So carry the spider outside, don't kill it. It has purpose. Patriarchal paradigms survive. They certainly survive to this point based on controlling women's sexuality. If you want to pass down property and wealth through the male line, then you've got to know who the daddy is. And the only way you do that is by locking down women sexually. Sacred feminine is about, she's the original advocate of free love, as far as I'm concerned. And so that might be fun for you to play that on your own. Think about things that you think are represented by patriarchy, and what would the opposite be? And so the sacred feminine has been the force that has invited that inquiry into my life, and that balance into my life. So I want to close with just 3 ideas, 3 things that I think, if you are interested in getting closer to the sacred feminine, that I think that you could do. And the great thing is you're in this course. So you're already right where you need to be. But the first thing I would say is start to know some of her stories. Know her stories. Maybe there's a goddess that's already calling to you. That's fantastic. That's a great place to start. If she's part of a living tradition, please honor that tradition and study her within that tradition. Maybe you want to look at your own lineage. If it's hard to find her in your lineage, then maybe you start with the land and where you are right now. And how far you go with that is completely up to you. I will be a lifelong student of this. I can't get enough. Maybe you just need a little bit, but that's a beautiful, beautiful place to start. So get to know some of her stories, her mythologies, and I'm certain you're going to have plenty of opportunities to do that in the next 12 weeks. The second thing is just get outside, just anywhere you can, get outside. And my suggestion would be, don't be productive. Don't listen to a podcast while you get your exercise. Just go sit somewhere and be quiet and watch and listen and start to develop a relationship with the land, because the land is her. I have a new practice of doing this in the woods behind my house at least once a week, and it's my personal goal to get it to every day. But just taking a blanket and laying there, and I have no concept of time, and I just wait. I wait until I feel done. And then finally, I go back to that tension between the brain and the heart wisdom, the mystical wisdom. Make space for the mystical. I think she's got a lot to teach us there. My guess is she's already teaching you in that way. There's so many ways in which we discount and doubt what we're already hearing and what we're already being taught. So maybe give that some space, whether that's your dreams, or maybe you get body messages like the one that I described. Maybe you who knows, signs and synchronicities. But allow that wisdom to be real and to be just as important to you as whatever you're feeding your brain. Yeah, I think that's what I've got to say. Thank you all so much. It is such a joy to be in conversation with people who are interested in this. It's fantastic. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you, Liz. That was fantastic. Thank you. And I love the fact that you went on this amazing travel around the world to all the sacred sites of the goddess. And actually what you came back to was the realization that the feminine is inside us all. or in fact in the garden outside the back door. So, I mean, that's wonderful for us to hear, that we can all access that.
I actually have a little funny story about that. I did do this trip. When I sold my company, I saved a little bit of money from that, and we used that to take this trip to go see some sites in Europe. And as I landed back in the United States, as my plane touched down, I was reading a book, and I turned to this page, and it said she traveled halfway around the world to become who she already was. And it was just so perfect and so fitting. We really don't have to go anywhere.
Yeah, very good. There's been a few people who want to know more about your intuition teacher, which I think is fantastic. The idea that we can have, we have a hairdresser or whatever, we can have an intuition teacher as well. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I can. She's based in California. She's a somewhat private person, and so I wouldn't feel comfortable putting her name out there because. But what I would say is really neat about her is she's. I don't think she has a website. I don't think she has any kind of big social media presence. I was introduced to her because I wanted to interview intuitive women. I had this crazy idea before I left my company that I was gonna, try and pivot the company to, focus on women's intuition before I realized I didn't belong in the business world. And I got introduced to her in that way. And it sort of came to both of us. It became clear in that conversation that we needed to work together. So we worked together for 2 years, and it was wonderful. And I'm sure there are many people that are doing this work. And I guess what I would just say about it is what was interesting is that a lot of it was about identifying the ways in which I was holding myself back and doubting myself. I think our intuition, there's this idea that people are intuitive or not. I don't believe that. And I think she would say that's not true either. It's more about the amount of baggage and cultural conditioning and all this stuff that we're telling ourselves about whether or not, we're allowed to listen to it. And so she really helped me peel a lot of those layers back.
And is there any tips that you can share with us about how we can connect with our intuition in a deeper way?
Well, getting outside, I got to keep going back to that. Things get much quieter for me. Everything becomes much easier to access when I can get outside. I think having meditation it depends. It's not for everybody. For me, having a stillness practice has been very, very important. If you've got a very quick and active mind that wants to tell you, wants to jump in and tell you what things are and what they aren't, having a practice to still that is very important. Those two things have been super helpful. And then, I have friends that I play with on this kind of thing. I have a witch's coven. We practice with our intuition. We allow ourselves to feel a little silly in front of each other and whatnot. And we practice reclaiming it, and we honor it when it shows up.
And now you're going to have to tell us what you practice. So how do you practice intuition?
Well, it's more like we practice spell casting. We practice feeling into things. If one of us has something going on, we get quiet and we listen and we say, I see this, I feel this. And then we test it. Were we right? Were we not right? If a friend is looking for a new house to live in, she might ask us, what do you see? What do you read? What do you feel? And we practice and we share and we feel safe in sharing that with each other. And sometimes we're right and sometimes we're not. But it's all about honing, like, what's the actual voice?
Brilliant. Okay, a few more questions here. The question says, what is the difference between surrender and embrace of the feminine?
Oh boy. I don't know that there is a difference. I feel like the embrace comes after the surrender. I feel like the embrace is the automatic response to the surrender. It's the recognition that you are being embraced, that you are being held, which has happened almost every single time I am able to surrender. And often I was going to say push to surrender because it doesn't always happen easily.
Yeah, great. Someone's asking about your necklace, Liz.
Oh, which one?
Yeah, about what the figurine is on your necklace.
So this is a miraculous medal. It's Mary. She is for me the link between my ancestral, my family of origin, and the divine feminine. She's the bridge that connects me to my ancestors and to my sacred path. So I believe this was Saint Bernadette saw an apparition of the Virgin Mary. I'm not really sure. It was a gift to me, and I wear it for that reason.
And Julie's asking, is it correct that Mary was never described as virgin in the original Hebrew, but that young was translated to virgin when the Greek version was compiled, and possibly to assuage their need for perpetuation of the supernatural, as their ancient deities were set to be replaced by the hierarchy of the holy Christian figures?
So that might be true. I don't know that for certain. That'd probably be a better question for Anne, honestly, but that would certainly make sense to me. And there's so much information, I think, about Mary specifically that so clearly connects her back to goddesses, and not just one goddess. And I think this is more evident in places like Southern Italy, for example. There's a wonderful woman named Alessandra Belloni who has written about the Black Madonna in Southern Italy, and how very obvious the devotion to Mary is really underpinned by an older goddess tradition that the Catholic Church just kind of absorbed and swept in, and we're like, okay, we can't stop this, so we're just gonna wrap it in and call it that. So I think with Mary, many things are plausible.
Liz, I'd like to just ask one final question, really, which is you often talk about sacred activism. And I wonder if you can just expand on that a bit as we close tonight.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's very active for me. And, this was my last podcast. Ruby and Christabel joined me on the last Home Different podcast. And I think what they're doing is a brilliant example of that. It's a very active question in my life. But I guess for me, it is the idea that exploring sacred feminine wisdom, I came to it to heal myself. And I think if we stop there, we're not doing our sacred work. There is much, much to be healed, and outlined this beautifully. And so the next question is, how do I take my spiritual practice out into the world? And it can be very daunting. We have access to all of the global problems by turning on our computer. How in the heck do we tackle that? That can be very daunting. But instead, looking at what can I do in my own community and in my own relationships, starting there, and just accepting that maybe that's ours to change. And you've got however many people in this course with you who can do it with you. It's not up to you. So I think that's really it, is yes, let's do the healing that we need for our lives and ourselves. It's so, so important. And when we're at a good place, let's figure out where we're going to take that beyond just enriching ourselves. Because if we're just enriching ourselves, we're just perpetuating this patriarchal paradigm that we all know is broken and toxic. And we don't want to do that.
Well, thank you, Liz. I think that's a really fantastic place to stop. And I just want to thank you and Anne so much for joining us tonight and sharing your wisdom and your generosity for coming here tonight, and for all these amazing insights that you've given us. I want to thank everyone else as well for joining us here tonight. We're all part of this journey, this new era, and we're all learning together. So it's a real honor to be sharing these evenings with you. I want to close tonight's session by handing over to Amrita, who's going to lead us in a closing meditation. And it might be nice to just sort of visualize us all in a huge circle that we started off at the beginning of the session. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. I'll hand over to you, Amrita. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fran, and thank you so much to Liz and Anne. Absolutely inspirational session. So maybe we can just take a moment just to pause, and just, if you're willing, just to turn inward, just turn your attention inward for a few moments, just so that we can just really catch our breaths after everything that's been shared tonight. And just to really allow ourselves to fully, just to take in and receive everything that's been given, that's been offered by both of our teachers in this session, just to fully open ourselves to receiving all of that, all of the perspectives, the perspectives that have been shared from the ancient history, the goddess cultures, 3,000 years ago, through to this era of separation, of patriarchy, this whole timeline that we've shared this evening. And then all the way through to the present day as well, how both Liz and so much about their own journeys, their own stories in doing this work of reclaiming the feminine for themselves and healing, and just bringing that thread that they're carrying through to today, to this moment in time where we're all gathered to share in holding this thread for ourselves, this thread of the feminine that goes back all this time. And in holding this thread, maybe we can also just see if we can tune into just this transmission of the feminine. Just see if we can, I really feel just that energy that's been evoked both through our teachers and through all of our presences tonight, just to see if we can just become conscious of that transmission of the feminine that's come through this evening, and just to hold that in our hearts. Just to remember and honor this energy, this transmission is sacred. And now just connecting our hearts, just connecting that energy that we may feel just down into the earth, just down into the patch of earth that is home for us, that we are connected to right now in this moment, just feeling our feet upon the sacred earth and just connecting that energy through our hearts down into the earth. One of my teachers, an indigenous native man, he shared with me this practice where at the end of every session that he does, he offers all the energy that was generated in that session back to the earth, just to remember that we're not only talking between ourselves, but we are also doing this work for the sake of the earth. So let us maybe take a moment, and in our own ways, we can just offer all of the energy and the nourishment, the love, the soul evoked in today's session, just offering it back to the earth. May she also be nourished by this time. And finally, just from our connection to the patch of earth beneath our feet, let us now just bring an image of the earth as a whole to our minds and our hearts, just imagining an image of our beautiful, shining blue-green globe, just holding that image for a few moments of the earth as a whole in our hearts. Just zooming out into space, just feeling that cosmic connection. And maybe we can also just imagine our little dots of connection, each of us here across all of the continents. Just feeling that connection across the globe between our hearts. Just honoring that interconnection as Anne shared, as the presence, the recognition of the feminine herself, that interconnectedness between us here and now. And on a final note, I just wanted to evoke the quality of the feminine that is wholeness, that includes everything, all of us, our shadows and our light, our wounds, our traumas, our gifts, all of the strengths, the wisdom and the pain of all of the lineages of women that came before us that we represent here today. And all of the different experiences and embodiments and expressions of the feminine that we share, that we bring in to this meeting. Just evoking this quality of wholeness, just to close this session, just to know that all of ourselves are needed, all of ourselves are included in this journey. And with that, when we're ready, we can just gently just open our eyes and just return ourselves back to the space. I do apologize for the noise. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you next week.